Tracked.
Good to go.
All right. How is everyone doing this morning? Bright and early at 9:05 a.m. I appreciate you guys coming in here. I know it's tough on a Saturday morning to motivate to come in and listen to some professor talk about random tech stuff. But I do appreciate the invite to come here and speak to you guys about some really cool stuff, I feel like. And when I was putting this together, I wanted to do something of value that would be of value to everyone, right? And something that has success pinned behind it that would be good for both, students, researchers that are in academia, and then obviously professionals. So I wanted to show how we approach this from a human-machine standpoint. Not all about AI and not all about non-AI. How we translate what we do in the competition space into real-world security. So I'll start off by saying I get to do the coolest stuff in the world, and I'm not exaggerating on that. I'll talk about that here shortly. I really get to, daily, I feel like I get up and get to go to a hobby every day. And it's almost like, if I got to go back to my 12-year-old self and talk about the stuff that I was doing, my 12-year-old self would be like, wow, I get to really do a lot of things. So my day job, I'm professor at Marshall University, and that obviously comes with a lot of really cool things that come in, and I see students that I currently have or have had. I see colleagues that I've met up with over the years. It's been a wonderful ride there, and I appreciate every day because it's really like getting in your car, and I look forward to going to work. And I know a lot of people don't have that kind of excitement. I've been doing this for 13 years, and I still get excited to go into work. And I worked 10 years in industry before I got into academia, and I didn't feel like that in industry, not every day. I really enjoyed the ride. I really enjoyed what I did. And I worked as a sysadmin. I worked at digital forensics lab. I just always leave that up. I was just like, Google me and you can figure out all that stuff. But I was like, I can put bullet points, but a picture's worth 1,000 words to show how the cool things I get to do at the university. So just really, really, really get to live out a dream there. But one of the cool things I've got to do, and I'll talk about this story here, is coach the U.S. national team. And that's been a learning experience to me, and I want to talk about why that's been a learning experience these past few years. And that's been a fun journey because it's been a learning curve for me in terms of how we approach that. And I think you guys will be proud of how we approach that from a Mountain State kind of perspective. So here's the problem, and this is what I looked at when I was putting this talk together, is what is the cyber threatscape right now? We know that threats are evolving fast, and when I was getting into this 20 years ago, one of the things we'd see exploit kits, and those exploit kits would be similar but different. I don't know if you guys that do threat hunting and threat intelligence are on that end, you see a lot of the same elements in exploit kits, right? Like they will use a lot of the same code, or they used to use a lot of the same code, and they would repackage that. If it would be a firewall patch, you would see, just a quick patch on that, and then they would, kind of retool the exploit kit and throw it back out into the environment again. And that was really what we were seeing for the better part of about 20 years. And what I'm seeing now is this new AI-powered attack, where a script kiddie can kind of push a button and spit out, whatever script that they want and retool that exploit kit almost at scale. So if Microsoft or Linux or whatever the case may be is patching, or if we have a vendor that patches, what we're seeing is that being retooled by someone who doesn't even know what the retooling is and throwing it back out in the environment as a new exploit. So we're seeing almost at just a phenomenal rate, and we're going to continue to see that. It'll taper off a little bit. That's a whole talk in of itself. But 0 days and supply chain compromises, they're just gradually getting more and more. It's like this cause and effect. We've been dealing with that for years. So one of the things I looked at is how do we keep the human in the loop on this one? So humans alone can't keep up, and machines alone lack context because they don't know what we've been doing in the last 20 years. They think that they know, but in really many cases, if you've played around with a lot of these AI models, or at least the AI/ML models, you'll see that they lack the context, and it's very frustrating at times trying to relay to it exactly what you're trying to feed into that model. They just don't have that context. Now, You all know the skills gap, it's real. That's another bullet point I want to address today. This skills gap, it's real. I can't potentially start to give what is needed for the field inside the classroom. It's just impossible for me within a 1-hour class block, 2 or 3 times a week to teach everything that's ready for the workforce. And that creates a little bit of a skills gap. So it's real, and it's a real thing. So how do we supplement what we're doing there? But really this question is, how do we combine those strengths? And how do we take the human in the loop, we take the machine, and we put those together and essentially get better at what we do? And that is the conundrum right now. You hear all of these presentations. You'll hear them today. Chris Atha's coming. Has Chris in here yet? I don't know if Chris has gotten here yet. I trained Chris years ago, in the laboratory. He's doing a talk on AI later. And so you're seeing all these presentations because there's this flux, there's this movement towards that. And one of the things I wanted to stop and spend the time on the keynote is, how did I get good? Why am I in a national team jersey today? And I wanted to stop and say, well, how did that happen? So I want to tell a story. So I have a really cool story to tell you today. And this is a cool story, bro. Cool story, bro. Is that how you say that? Cool story, bro. Yeah, you said bra, right? Cool story, bro. I'm sorry. I'm trying to wake you up. I'm trying to get there. So I have some time. We'll get you there. So the story. Let's go back to March of 2014 at Marshall University. So I'd been there about a year. And we, up until 2014, had no placements in any competitions, none. Prior to 2018, we were dry. I remember you all know Bill Gardner that I worked down there with, and we had stood up a competitive cyber team, and we went to our first competition, which is a blue team comp. And I was like, all right, I'm giving you everything I could give you. All right, kids, go in and get them. And I was like, well, at least we'll finish in the top 3, right? We'll be there. So I was confident, and we went in, and like an hour later they came out. I'm like, this is like a 6-hour competition. And I was like, what happened? And we're like, we flipped on the firewall, and we locked ourselves out of port 3387. And I was like, well, interesting, because you have no access to any of your boxes now. So they basically flipped on the firewall and remoted themselves out of the environment, and that's what happened. So that was a lesson learned. I was like, oh, we got to go back and go to the simple stuff. So really, we had started at a kind of a baby step and had 4 straight top 10 finishes in National Cyber League, which was phenomenal in of itself, but we just couldn't get over the hump. The highest we ever got in 2018 was 8th in the Mid-Atlantic Regionals of the Collegiate Cyber Defense competition. There was just no wins or placements up until then. So the success just wasn't there. So I dropped back and I thought, okay, I really have to step back and say, what made me successful in the workforce? What accelerated? What was the rocket fuel that was poured onto that? And one of the things that we looked at was, how could I make things happen quicker? Make things happen at scale. Now, you sysadmins and the old hats in here know that you can really speed up productivity on a Linux system through a cron job, right? And I was like, okay, so automation is the key here. If I can automate certain menial tasks, then we could start to focus on the task at hand, right? Because if you have 30 challenges in a CTF and you have to download all 30 challenges and go through all 30 challenges and do all of this, why can't I automate that? So we started the automation process, and we started to create the student mindset of automating whatever they could to offload the menial tasks, right? Sound familiar? This created a wild fire of success really quickly. And in 2020, it went crazy. Everyone forgot about this when COVID happened, but we just kind of jumped in and went from this mediocre team to a really good team all of a sudden. And I was like, oh, this is odd. Ended up winning National Cyber League, winning National Championship, and consistently from that moment forward, from that point until now, are winning consistently within the top 1%. we're winning multiple national championships. So it was just this wildfire event that happened, and it all started with quick automation, right? And then, you see all these things leapfrog, and you see it in the news, they're building a new building, and all these things are happening at Marshall because of the success of the students. And I never want to fail to highlight that it had nothing to do with me, it had nothing to do with the faculty, it really had everything to do with our students because they were the ones who were competing, right? So that had a lot to do with how we kind of trained their brains to think, okay, how could you do it bigger, faster, stronger, quicker, right? So that was kind of I always call it the West Virginia way, right? We always look at ingenuity, and that was just kind of the mark that we had made. And when I go to conferences, I say, we kind of come from a history where we've been marginalized and we've had to do so much with so little, right? And you look at that. And I grew up right here in Salt Rock, West Virginia, and I grew up like right at the edge of coal country. My family were coal miners. We didn't have much growing up, so we had to do a lot with a little. And that's just kind of the way of thinking. So that way of thinking is wildly successful, believe it or not. So really looking and stepping back and doing something good with very little, in many cases can lead to bigger things. And it's just like going up a set of stairs, right? You're taking that ladder step forward and forward and forward. And within, 2 years, we'll have a really nice facility down at Marshall. It doesn't just serve Marshall, it'll serve the state of West Virginia. And I think that, again, will pour more rocket fuel on this, success model, regardless of what people say. I'll say it. You'll see students that will attract both here and abroad. And, this is going to build this even bigger, believe it or not. So it's building the Mountain State. And we're hoping that even our partners at State and WVU, they all get the rocket fuel as well, because this is a problem that is statewide, and we really want to be the center of the universe when it comes to cybersecurity. And I say that everywhere I go. This is my local crowd. You guys are my home team. So I say this when I go to a lot of national places. I want this state to be the center of the universe when it comes to cybersecurity, and we're damn near close. So, July 2023, I get this random phone call, all right? And picked it up, and I had a captain on the 2020 national team, and she had called me, and she's like, hey, would you be interested in coaching on the U.S. cyber team? And I was like, sure, I'll help out. I'll be like a forensic mentor or something like that. I can do some reverse engineering. I can do that. Okay, cool. So went through this, talked to some people, and I get this other call, and they're like, hey, would you want to be our head coach? And I'm like, I've never head coached the U.S. national team. It's like, okay, no one ever has. Like, we've had 2 coaches. They went through a 1-year cycle. They're kind of fading out. They're retiring out. We think you would be a good fit. And I was like, all right, so what's the problem? That's what I asked. I was like, what's the level of desperation you need to bring me on? What's happening here? And I said, well, here's the thing, and we really want to bring someone in that we think that might be able to translate success on the U.S. national team. I was like, you just want to hang up on them all of a sudden, just like, hey, that's not going to work out. We're not going to do this. So I was stupid enough, I think, at that moment to say, oh, yes, I can do this. And I picked it up, and then this crazy whirlwind happened all at once, where things are being announced, and it just went crazy there. And they're announcing all these partnerships and all of that. So really this kind of wildfire began with that. And when I stepped back and I took over the team, to give you an idea of the U.S. national team, this is funded by the NIST, NICE folks at NIST. They had a contract to basically stand up a U.S. national team that would compete in international competitions. And there's 2 major competitions that we started to compete in, which they had been for 2 years. Was the European Cybersecurity Challenge, which is held somewhere in the EU. We competed in that a couple of weeks ago. And then the upcoming International Cybersecurity Challenge, which will be held in Tokyo, Japan here in November. So those were the 2 major challenges that we wanted to prepare for. And the U.S. Cyber Team competes in both the ICC and the ECSC annually. The ECSC includes all the EU member nations, like Ireland and you name any EU member nation. that is within the European Union and invited guests. So we come in as an invited guest. Obviously, we're not a member of the EU, but we are given a special invite as a guest, as is other teams like Canada and Ukraine, and teams that are potentially looking at membership into the EU. We're not looking at membership into the EU, obviously, but we do have a vested interest as a world country to compete. So. In the ICC, we basically compete against what we call the super teams, which they'll put teams together like Africa, Team Asia, which includes Japan, Indonesia, a lot of those teams. Team Canada, Canada has a national team that they form. Team Europe, Team Latin America. So Team Europe is like the EU super team where they put Germany and Poland and Ireland and UK together, and they take their best players and put into international competitions. Team Latin America, same way. All the Latin America and South America teams put together a super team. Team Oceania, which is Australia and New Zealand, all of their best players, and then us. So that's normally about a 10 to 15 athletes. We take 10 to Europe. We take 15 to the ICC, the international competition, and we have 2 alternates, in case someone starts puking or gets sick or something, which happens. We always have 2 alternates, or we'll strategically replace out a couple depending on our strategy, which we've been doing the past couple of years. It's a 2-day competition normally. We have a capture the flag and a hardware competition. So that's the normal thing you're seeing down the hallway, a Jeopardy style competition with a hardware CTF built in. So we're usually given a breadboard of some type. It just needs something not so simple, right? It's normally like side channeling or glitching or something like that we'll be challenged on, and we have to do that CTF within an 8-hour window. Day 2 is a little bit different, right? We have in Europe there is what they call the Faust model. That's after Faust University in Germany, which is attack and defense. This is a red versus blue. Now here in the States we have red exercises, pen testing competitions, and we have blue-based defense competitions like CCDC. We do not really have an effective attack and defense. Attack and defense is crazy because you're looking at both a defensive strategy and an offensive strategy all at once. So you're stealing flags, you're submitting flags, you're worried about uptime, and all of these crazy things that are happening all at once within an 8-hour window. It is absolutely insane, and I'll show you some screenshots of this here shortly. Because it's really, really cool to watch this in action. So when I took over, we stepped back, and one of the things I came in 2023, August of 2023, when the team went to San Diego. So I got to witness, and I saw them go to Athens, Greece. They placed 3rd in Athens, which was a very respectable placement. In 2023 in San Diego, I was there on site, and I was taking notes, and we went 4th place there. So we didn't, I wouldn't say we weren't great, but we weren't like where we expected the U.S. team to be, in my personal opinion. And I think everyone was under that opinion because, we wanted to score a win. So I went to ECSC in Norway, placed 14th place overall, 4th in the guest bracket. And it was just to me, it was a low placement. In 2024, we went to Italy and went there and did well. I mean, we were 11th place and 2nd place. So we were moving up, so I wasn't like, hitting the abort button. But I saw the same trend that happened at Marshall. And then in 2024, we went to Chile and placed 4th again. So we were kind of stuck in this rut, right? And I was like, this is the same stuff I saw at Marshall. And so the team was just kind of doing the same thing. I stood back for a season and just watched them compete. And that's the important thing. You have to assess what's going on, whether you're working in an organization or whatever. And this is what I did for a solid year. And it was so frustrating to just kind of watch. And I say this to managers that are here as kind of a cautionary tale. Sometimes it's important just to watch and listen and get a full assessment of what's going on. I think any good security assessment, it's good to just passively listen to something right before you go in and start blazing. that was important to me. So it was like a passive monitor, just kind of hit the start on the PCAP file and just sit and listen for a year. And that was a little maddening for a while. But up until 2025, we had no international wins prior to the 2025 competition season. And people were starting to think like, well, why are we funding an $8 million a year organization if we're not winning? I mean, that happens, right? You see this in college football, like coaches getting fired. And I'm like, well, they fire me, right? I'm not making $8 million a year. I'm not making $0 million a year. This is an effort that I've kind of taken on for the fun of it. So in 4 years of international competition play, we had zero zilch wins. So I stood back, and we have a whole staff of assistant coaches. You ever want to get involved in this? I'll talk about this at the end. USCybergames.org is a wonderful organization. And we have a ton of assistant coaches that are just phenomenal CTF and attack and defense players that have kind of faded into becoming coaches, or they're just professionals that serve as kind of SMEs in their field. So I stepped back and went to our attack and defense assistant coach and our CTF coach, Chris Holler. I'll talk about Chris here shortly, of Chris specifically, because I talked to him yesterday about this presentation and what we could put in. And I looked at our CTF and our attack and defense coach, but specifically our attack and defense coach, and I'm like, hey, we have to level up and get good. And this is how we're going to do it. And this is how we did it at Marshall. So I kind of put the onus on Jacob Elliott and Chris Holler to do that. So back in the summer, we get the team together in person in Reston, Virginia, somewhere in the D.C. area. So we have a team of 30, even though we travel with 15, we brought all 30 team members into a hotel in Reston, Virginia. It wasn't anything fancy. We didn't have the best of facilities. It was a hotel conference room just like this right here. It had Wi-Fi. We whipped in a bunch of old equipment. I wanted it to be as just bare bones as possible. I wanted to get back to basics. And we put them in a room and we said, this is what we're going to do. We are going to give you services. We're going to build these services for you. And your job, these are legitimate services. We're going to air gap them in this room. And today, for 8 hours, you are going to find the vulnerabilities in those services. As a real-world scenario, this is what you're going to do. These are active running services that are found out in the wild, and you're going to find the vulnerabilities in them today. So, first day, we did some briefing, and they did okay. They didn't do much. So we got at the end of the day, and we're like, okay, guys, we really need to sit down and work out a game plan of how we're going to attack those. So the process was we decided that we were going to recon the service first, because we had teams of, and we broke them up into teams of 10, just as we would in competition, and said, hey, recon this vulnerable service, whether it be a blog post, whether it be the website of the vendor, or it be an academic paper, whatever the case, recon that service and see if you can break or blood that service to understand the flaws. Okay? Now, this is where like rocket fuel got poured onto that, because we started looking at automation. Because we couldn't do that in an 8 to 9 hour period, and we started talking about how do we automate that process. So we started to augment our human intuition with some of our AI elements. So, for example, you all have worked with web apps before. One of the common commands that you would use against any HTTPS or any HTTP service is curl, right? Well, if you're typing curl over and over again, why not automate that? And why not look at ways that if you are reconning that service, to crawl over that service in an automated fashion? So we started to build tooling that did that started to look at those services and run a number of different checks against that to start to identify like entropy, for example. Like if you have this big service and it's encrypted, right? And you're trying to figure out what encryption's in play, well, maybe we want to see where the data's at. So we would look at things like entropy, we would do scoring of that and start to get patterns, pattern recognition, right? And I'll talk about that. That's something that machines are really good at, is pattern recognition, that we're not always good at. So we started looking at that, and by the end of the day, I kid you not, we had 2 services to them. They found 15 CVEs that went documented. At the end of the day, now think about the real world implication of that. 15 CVEs, there's a lot of organizations out there that are lucky to get 1 to 2 out a year, right? Like full threat hunting teams, and it's like 15, and they're like boom, 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 boom. We submitted those. Those are CVEs that are on record right now, that have been fully documented, discovered, have been disclosed, and have been corrected, and have been put out to the public. 15, and I put 15 plus because we actually have 21 right now. We have 6 that are in review. So maybe by the end of the year, we're looking at 21 CVEs that was found by a team of 30 members in a single day. Wow. And I was like, okay, now, how's this going to translate into competition? How is this going to translate in competition? So the impact of that is obviously we strengthen open source security, right? And I'm not going to talk about the models and what we did. I will say that these particular services were open source. They were well known, and we responsibly disclosed those. And for the sake of the vendor and the open source project, I want to kind of keep that kind of silent. But we did have responsible disclosure around that. But the thing is, we gave our athletes a real world disclosure experience. So that was a good exercise in a real world environment that resulted in these CVEs. And I was like, all right. So we were able to locate the fresh bugs, find the reliable points of compromise, and document that. And really started to look and say, okay, well, here's the success of it. We have these CVEs. So this is kind of the workflow from reconnaissance to breaking to disclosure. And I always say this to individuals that are out there, and they're like, yeah, we're already doing this in threat hunting. You're doing that daily, right? You're doing it in just disparate, if you're doing it remotely, you have a group, a team over here, a team over here. One of the things I would strongly recommend is getting those teams together and just put them together for a day, give them the challenge and say, look, we're going to break this and we're going to see if we can find some CVEs. You'll have a lot of fun doing it. Now, our team kicked and screamed when it was all happening, and they were like, oh, we don't want to do this, until like 15 CVEs got on record, right? And they're like, yeah, why haven't we done this before? And we continue to do that. But this is the workflow. So locating those bugs. But at the end of the day, I think the important thing under responsible disclosure is we're enhancing both credentials and capabilities, right? Because those individuals can go into job interviews, they can go back to their employer and say, look what we found as a team. And that's important there. So we're training how we fight, right? So that is an important thing to not be remiss here. It's not all about competition. It's about literally looking at what you're doing on a daily basis, looking at your kind of operations, whether it's a security operations center, whether it's a cybersecurity team, whether you're working for a product vendor, to look back and say, how do we get our team together to find those particular bugs and points of compromise? Because sometimes it's kind of hard to do alone, right? And I'll tell you why it's hard to do alone, because it's really hard to just bounce some ideas off the person beside of you. You can do it through Discord, and I'm not saying we continue to do that, but having that person beside of you, and when you put the heat on them to say, okay, by 5 o'clock today, I want to see some actionable stuff, it's just fun to be together, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But we also put the task on them to bake AI and automation along with the human intuition into that, and this is kind of how we did it. So we took that idea with the CVEs. We presented at the NICE conference in Denver in June 2025. Chris Howler, who I was telling you about earlier, went to the DEF CON AppSec Village. So we took this same presentation and presented it at the AppSec Village at DEF CON 33 this past August. And I was like, all right, this is cool, but we're still freaking losers, right? We still have not won anything yet. So it was successful, and it was hopeful, because we're getting a lot of traction on it in both conferences and DEF CON. So DEF CON took a hold of it, and DEF CON's like, hey man, that's cool. Like, you're really doing some cool stuff, and how can we help? And we're like, okay, well, give us your services and we'll actually, scan them for bugs. So we looked at a lot of open source projects and stuff like that. But Chris is a really good guy. He works for Amada Technologies. He's my attack and defense coach, the guy there on the right. So he actually wrote a good book called The Hack Us Back. And if you really are getting into pen testing, grab that book. That is an excellent book that starts you from bottom to top. Him and Jesse Varsaloni wrote that, who's a professor at University of Maryland, UMGC. And I went through it and found it to be phenomenal. It's just a good textbook that's fresh. This came out this year. Sometimes textbooks can get kind of wonky and dry early on in this field because things change so quickly. It's a good book, and he does a good job. But he's our attack and defense coach. And then there on the left, we took it to Denver. The person in the center, Sam Myers. Sam Myers works for MITRE. He is our hardware hardware guy, and also, if you guys have ever played MITRE's eCTF, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. MITRE has a free eCTF. Look into it. They will actually ship you a board, and you have like months to work this CTF. So you're actually heavily involved in that. Sam Myers, who's our U.S. National team captain, is the one who's the kind of the brainchild behind that. It's a really fun competition to play. MITRE's eCTF, so the embedded CTF. Play it, because there's a lot of our fingerprints on that CTF. It's pretty fun. So, with all that being said, we went into the competition season. Now, granted, we have to go to Poland this month, in a sense. So a few weeks ago, we took this strategy to Warsaw, Poland. So we took 10 individuals, loaded them up on the plane, landed in Warsaw, adjusted our sleep schedule, and all of that. Got the team together, briefed them. And I'm just taking this deep breath like, okay, all of this preparation goes in to doing this. How is this going to translate in the environment? Yeah, it happened. And it happened like a wildfire. It was like, it got so bad that right now we're accused of cheating. That's how bad it got. And really I kind of felt guilty because you saw this group of individuals that were just good, but they weren't great yet. And I see this kind of idea happen where they're like, man, they're pushing the magic buttons and getting the answers out of AI, and I'm having to go back and defend them. Like, no, this is a strategy that goes back to 2020, pre-AI, where we're automating a lot of our mundane tasks, right? So we ended up finishing first place in the entire ECSC. And just to give you an idea of what the scoreboard looked like at the end of that, so this is the 2-day competition. We did fairly well in the Jeopardy-style CTF competition. So we put up, 5786, so there were about 33 challenges on the CTF board. Our closest competitor was Canada at 1383 in the CTF, so we really did well in that. We camped in first place for most of the day. I think we ended up in second after the overall day one. I think Italy passed us up, which we were fine. We knew we are not a strong CTF country. We knew attack and defense was going to be our good strategy. So the next day, you actually look and you see the AD's overall score of attack and defense. That is 265,969. Our closest competitor was 97,644 from Canada. So that meant we doubled the score of the second place competitor. Now, how do we do that? It goes back to the training camp of the real world disclosure. I fully believe that because you're training the brains to think differently. You're training the brains to think what AI can't do and then understand what AI can do. All right? So, ask the question. Kind of gave you the hint there. How did we do all this? Where did it start? So I want to give you an idea of how the attack and defense scoreboard looks. And I think this is interesting for you all that haven't looked into CTFs before of what this environment looks like. So this is the day 2 attack and defense competition. I took this screenshot around tick 256. Now, we had scoring ticks that would happen every 2 minutes. So that meant that the environment would do a sweep and do a tick. It would look at the board and look at all of our services and then apply points every 2 minutes. So over an 8-hour competition, we looked at about 420 ticks, if you do the math, at every 2 minutes. So I just took a screenshot at tick 256 and just to show where we stood on things. Now, to break this down, you'll see at the top there's 5 services on the board. So they presented to us 5 services. Those services can be exploited. So one of the things that the teams have to do is first assess the environment and say which one of those services can we go after and essentially blood or break? So you kind of get an idea of what the service is like by looking at it. You see a service up there called firewall, right? So it could be a service that has a pretty gnarly firewall that we have to exploit and go from there. You see one called Gitter. It kind of gives you an idea. There's a pillar box, a jitterish DB. So you're looking at the actual service and say, okay, it was probably a database service. And then Heaven Sent over there on the corner, which we worked on all day. And you see kind of what happens here. So I just kind of highlighted Gitter there. And what happens is you're having to figure out what the service does, okay? And that takes some recon. Sound familiar? So you're having to do recon on the service. That service is normally encrypted, so the traffic to and from is encrypted. So you're having to PCAP the traffic and figure out what's going on. And from there, you're having to assess what type of encryption's in place. That requires both machine automation and human intuition, because it's like, okay, I see entropy here, I see these packets are sending this data, this could be the type of encryption. It could be like elliptic curve or something like that in terms of encryption. So I have to go out and find a way to exploit that. That could be blog posts, that could be web pages, that could be academic papers. And I'm not saying that this one was the case, and I don't want to give out too much of a strategy, but we actually found an exploit that worked fairly well on a service from an academic paper. From a theoretical academic paper, there was some code in there that we were able to just kind of retool somewhat, and we were able to blood that service. And you see that USA and Slovakia, actually, you see that little blood drop there, that meant that we were the one who took over that service. So we were able to blood that service, to take that service. Well, that's half the battle, because once you take the service, then you have to figure out a way to build an exploit to use that service to apply and fire at other teams. So you're having to craft an exploit that would throw flags. So we built our own little flag thrower that basically throws flags and steals flags from the environment and essentially submits flags on our behalf. So one of the things you would have to do as well is to develop a strategy that would potentially take down other services. Now, you're playing the best teams in the world. So going after of just putting their service into a loop or taking it down is not going to be a good strategy, because you're going to get up against some really good teams here. So, you know, if I were working against some weak teams, you know, I'd work on taking their services down, right? That's what you would normally do as an offensive, from an offensive security perspective. Downtime is not good. But here in this environment, and I'll just look at TIC 256. So one of the things that we look at and how it's scored, and I want to back up here a little bit, and I have some time to do this. So there's three elements that we score from here. We have, and I'll point this out, I don't know if my camera can go this far, but you see three scores there. You see an overall score with a little target beside of it, you see a little shield, and then you see that little time there. So the first one is our overall score. So that's our attack score. So how we're attacking other teams and attacking and basically stealing flags and submitting flags that were taken from other teams from that service. That second score is our defensive score. What are other teams taking from us in terms of flags? Now, they could exploit a flag store or a service that we not exploit and take flags from us that way. So if you look at that overall score, our target score, that 66,000 score, is relatively high. Our defensive score is relatively low, and that's what we want to see there, right? And we see that bottom, that uptime, every team's kind of the same in that. We rarely will have effect of taking services down. So there's some strategy of why we may want to take another team's service down. I'll not disclose that because it's getting recorded, but there is a strategy of taking a service down, so you might, you know, spin on that a little bit. Some of you guys are pretty smart and know when a service is down, there's certain things that happen that don't happen. So there's some strategy there. But every tick we're scored, and at TIC 256, we're also scored on SLA, which is a service level agreement. You all know that uptime is key, right? If you're an admin, you know that SLA is important. So our uptime is important, but more importantly, do we maintain exploits on these boxes? So over the course of the day, one of the things that we did, we actually blooded 3 of those 5 boxes. And what that allows us to do is use those to build exploits off of. And we got to the end of the day, we actually took that one on the far right. We were the only team to take it. We had an hour left to go in the competition. And they're like, we exploited the box, but we can't figure out a way to automate. And that was what we get to meet with our captains, in request meetings. And they're like, we can't get an exploit out. We can't build this exploit. And I'm like, all right, so let's go the old-fashioned way. Let's just start throwing flags manually. So we put teams into it, into groups, and we just started manually throwing flags at teams that we knew could not reverse our services. So it was just this old-fashioned ingenuity that we looked at that got us some points towards the end of the day. But part of that strategy, and I hate to ramble on about it, and what it came down to was this idea that over the course of the day, we attacked it the same way that we did in the real world, which meant that we did our recon of the service, we found an exploit that we could blood or take that service over, we were able to weaponize that service and throw that particular service and its vulnerabilities against other teams. And it worked. And why it worked was because we had a strategy that was effective from real world application. That's what it comes down to. And we did that by hooking in all of our tool sets, which we hadn't done in the past, with, I'm careful to say APIs from AI, because that sounds so scary that you're just throwing tokens at something. So a little idea here, there's this paranoia in the field that CTFs and attack and defense forever is going to be affected by AI. So I'll give you an idea in a CTF challenge. If I were to go down and throw my best AI APIs at Benny's CTF down the hallway here, I'd probably automatically answer about, if he's built those challenges well, and I know Benny well, he's built them well, or has had a hand in them, I've played a lot of his challenges, I'll auto-solve about 5 or 6 of his challenges, which is good, because that offsets and lets me focus on harder problems. With those challenges, I'll probably, with the APIs, probably throw about 100 to 200,000 tokens at it, at a challenge. That'll cost me about $1 to $2, okay? It will solve that challenge within about 1 to 2 minutes, or it'll set and spin forever. It will not, it'll be one or the other. So if that happens, if I see that it's not solving it immediately and it's not clearing it out, then I have to step in and prompt and say, wait a minute, where are you hanging up on? What's the problem here? Well, I'm looking at it as an RE challenge and it's a crypto challenge. Well, you're looking at it wrong. And that's where you have to stop and say, whoa, bro, like AI, take a break. Let me take over and drive for a couple of minutes. This is a crypto challenge. Can you look at this for me from this lens? Oh, okay, I'm on it, boss. And I'm going to look at it that way. Okay, I'm going to go over here and focus and see if I can find any entropy in that CTF challenge. I'm going to see if I can find any patterns. Will you look for patterns as well? Yep, I'm on it, boss. And that's exactly how I would approach it if it can't auto-solve it. And eventually, we would come to a consensus to be like, hey, I may have found this academic paper, here's something, and I can pair that up with what I'm doing and eventually clear that board. And that's what we did in Poland. That's what we're going to do in Tokyo, hopefully. And that's what we're going to do in attack and defense. And I step up and say, do you feel good about Tokyo? I feel dang good about Tokyo because we did well in Poland. Because it's a strategy that's effective. It's effective in the field. It's effective in competition. And the reason why is because we as humans bring creativity, ethics, and intuition. That is something that's really hard to scale with a machine. How many of you guys seen Terminator 2, right? You remember the T-1000? Like, he was just not human, right? And you had this human element in John Connor. You know, he had the ethics and the intuition and things that you just cannot put into a machine. And it's hard to believe, like, so many years later that kind of comes true. So the machines bring speed, scale, and pattern recognition. Once you realize that is what AI brings to the table, how do you put those three things, creativity, ethics, and intuition, with speed, scale, and pattern recognition? It's like a dynamite and a blasting cap when you put those together and are able to do it effectively. Now, you all can do that and pull down a challenge or pull down a file and drag it and drop into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you're using. Gemini, Google has a Sec Gemini. Have any of you guys used that yet? Google Sec Gemini, got the invite to it. It's fairly effective, but it still chomps on CTF challenges. It's still got its clunkiness. But automation and AI, if you're able to put those elements in those 2 bullet points with the automation and AI, you automate the mundane. That gives you the ability to focus on the elements that bring in the creativity and intuition. And it's highly effective because they create this adaptive, resilient defense that then will produce success. This is what we did in training camp in Virginia earlier this year and found 15 plus CVEs. That is exactly the strategy there. So what we were able to do is, from a very limited and cheap perspective, this is not costing no more than a couple of dollars. I mean, if I were to price what it would cost to hook your tooling into some of the AI APIs that are out there and throw tokens at it, you're looking at pennies on the dollar. I mean, probably your tooling, you're looking at maybe a couple of dollars at most, because you're not throwing a bunch of garbage at it. You can throw tokens from AI APIs all day. You're just wasting your time. So you really want to be very directed about that, and that's what we did. So that is what was the rocket fuel on the fire. Cyber competitions, if you're not playing today, go down there and goof around and play in it, because they really prove that this synergy works under pressure. It's tough. If you've never played one, it's tough. It's not fun. It's sometimes not fun. It creates some stress. It's good stress. Because you know what? You leave the game and go home. You know, do I play today? I'll probably go down there and goof around for a little bit, for a couple of hours, and see if I can clear a challenge or 2 out. But at the end of the day, I get to go home. I don't have to lose sleep over not solving that challenge, right? And that's the fun part about it. That's the beauty of it. But when the attack vectors come in at your own business, you say, man, I've seen that in a CTF before. I know how to attack that. We have seen that as a team in a CTF before, because we have worked with that as a team. We've responsibly disclosed open source projects that we've worked with that. We know how that works. And that brings that synergy under kind of duress, if you want to call it that. So some kind of closing remarks here. What lessons have I learned from this journey? Competitions are chaos in a sandbox. They really are. That's why I'm a big advocate of this. This is why I push it in these parts. That's why we're really good at it. It's that chaos, that sandbox that we can go home and sleep on. You know, the theme of the conference is what? The things that keep us up at night? Well, it's not cyber competitions, right? Because you can leave those and go home. You can go home and go to bed. You know, Benny's not going to cause me to lose sleep tonight. I'm going to sleep like a baby. But he's going to probably put some stress on me here in a little bit. And that's fun, because they force that real-time problem solving with that cross-functional teamwork and adaptability. Something that's really hard to replicate when you're doing it as an individual. And we've seen that AI-assisted triage paired with that human intuition brings success to it. And it looks at those adversarial AI tactics, the prompt injections and stuff like that. If I'm writing CTF challenges now, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to put red herrings in it, because the machine's going to be dumb enough if I have a challenge that I'm writing for you. So if you ever see a challenge with my name on it, it's not going to be a drag and drop in AI. Because what I've done is I put some red herring in there that says, hey AI, this is what this challenge is, and this is how you solve it. And the machine's stupid enough, it's like, okay, all right, I'm on it. Okay, it's what it says, so that's what I'm going to do. And it's dumb enough to do that. But the human intuition would be, okay, that's not right. This is what I'm actually seeing. This is how I solve it. So those are happening now. But at the end of the day, these environments teach what textbooks can. And that's the beauty of it. This is why this journey has been so fun for me. If you look at incident response, most of that is triage. But the humans make the critical decisions. We're writing the reports, right? We're speaking to middle management. We're speaking to C-suite. In threat hunting, The machines detect the anomalies, but the humans form the hypotheses. We think this is what's happening. All right, machine, go and look at that and see if that hypothesis test is true. You see where I'm going with this? And policy and ethics is the humans guide the machine actions. But the result of this is we have a faster, smarter, safer defense. And if somebody's kicking and screaming against what AI is saying and say, oh, it's going to replace our job, I have a card up here that you can give them and call me. And I'll give this presentation wherever it may be to talk about the success of this, of how, with humans in the loop, we're dang good at what we do. And we're not going to be dang good at what we do if we're putting a machine on that. And I'll hold to that, at least for the next couple of years, because we've seen it in competition. The teams that primarily used AI to try to solve challenges didn't do that well. They just didn't. The teams that used AI and automation along with human intuition, we set people strategically beside of each other, and they were able to get an idea of how to solve these challenges. We just did well. We just did very well. And at the end, that faster, smarter, safer defense is where we want to be. And I wrap this up to say this. Here's my contact information. Feel free, if you ever want to contact me, you can reach out. If you want to reach out to me on the Cyber Games server about anything, volunteering or things like that, reach out to me on that email. If there's anything I can ever do to you or with you at Marshall, any help that I can provide in the community, anything that I can do, reach out to me. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Somewhat involved on X, not heavy on there anymore, but I try to share the successes out on LinkedIn. Feel free to add me and contact me. So I say this much to stop now. Thank you, and do you guys have any questions? Anything in the crowd? Anything that's kind of like bugging? Yes, over there.
You mentioned that they were suspecting you all of cheating. What does cheating look like in a competition?
Cheating would involve me going down the hallway, downloading the CTF challenges, dragging and dropping those into an AI API and clearing the board out. To my knowledge, that hasn't happened at DEF CON. That hasn't happened in any CTF challenge yet. It will, and it will be a game changer. Someone will figure out how to clear an entire CTF on the push of one button because they've automated it. It just hasn't happened yet. I think there were other teams that looked at our score and said, how do we go from being a mediocre team to a first place team? And I just spent an hour showing you how we did it. And it's very transparent. That is the suspicion of cheating. And I'm happy to say that we were accused of that because that shows that we're getting the attention. And when you're the top team, you're always accused of cheating. Like, the Patriots deflated the footballs, right? And what else is going on? Coaches are stealing signs, but they're national champions. Have you ever noticed that? Like, the champions are always the ones accused of cheating. So that's what caused all of that to happen. But I tell you this, that it's just not possible. You can run the best AI APIs on these CTFs and it's not going to work. It's just not going to. It'll solve a couple of challenges, but it won't work. Any other questions? That's fine. All right, reach out to me if you need anything. Appreciate you guys.